Silence. Then a mother's voice, recorded, raw, barely holding together. "Don't tell me not to worry. This is my child, my flesh and blood that I brought into this world. Don't tell me not to worry. Absolutely not." Christine Wells Wansley said those words on the same night her 18-year-old son vanished from a boat off the Mississippi coast. She didn't know it yet, but in the hours that followed, she would be told he simply stayed behind. She would check his phone location herself and find it somewhere it should never have been. She would call agency after agency, begging someone, anyone, to take her seriously, and be turned away by every single one. 2 days later, Nolan Wells's body was found. Not somewhere the tides could explain, in the exact spot where he was last seen alive. Since then, 2 independent investigators have gone frame by frame through a recorded interview given by the friends who were with him that night, and found 6 moments where the story does not hold together. A phone that moved when it shouldn't have, a Coast Guard call that may never have officially happened, a photo referenced before it existed, a boy who says he wasn't in the room, describing exactly what was said inside it. A 911 call made not for Nolan, but against his own grieving family. And hours of confrontation that, according to what these investigators found, appear in no official police report at all. No charges have been filed, no arrest has been made. But a grand jury is coming, and for the first time, all 6 of those contradictions are about to be laid out, side by side, in the open. This is what actually happened the night Nolan Wells disappeared, and why, months later, his mother is still asking the same question nobody has fully answered. Where was her son's phone, and why didn't the truth come out until she forced it to? Before any of this, before the phone calls, the boats, the agencies passing a mother back and forth like a problem nobody wanted to own, there was just a kid from Mississippi with his whole life still in front of him. Christine describes her son as gentle, as someone who made the people around him feel welcomed just by being in the room. Not the loudest voice at the party, the one who made everyone else feel like they mattered. Nolan Xavier Wells had played football at Southwest Mississippi Community College. He was getting ready to go back to school. He was 18 years old, weeks away from turning 19 in August, a birthday that never came. Hold on to that, because everything we're about to walk through, the timelines, the phone records, the jurisdictional back and forth, can start to feel abstract, procedural, almost clinical. It isn't. Underneath every discrepancy we're going to lay out is a teenager who got on a boat for a holiday afternoon and never came home, and a mother who has spent every day since demanding someone explain why. The case, as the public understands it, begins with a single phone call around 11 p.m. on July 4th. Warren Hudson called Christine. He asked if she'd seen or heard from Nolan. She said no. According to Christine, that's when Warren told her Nolan had chosen to stay behind on Horn Island, to talk to a girl. It's a plausible story. Teenagers do that. He'll turn up in the morning, sunburned and sheepish. Except Christine didn't just accept it. She pulled up Nolan's location on Life 360, and what she found didn't match the story at all. Nolan's phone wasn't on the island. It was already back on the mainland. If Nolan stayed behind, his phone should have stayed with him. It didn't. It came back with the group, and according to Christine, nobody had volunteered that detail. She had to find it herself, and only then, she says, did Warren admit, "We have his phone." Warren's own account, given later in a recorded interview, tells it differently. He says he told Christine about the phone immediately, unprompted, in that very first call, that he said it in front of multiple witnesses, and that she can pull up the phone call if she wants proof. Here is why that 10-second discrepancy matters more than it might seem to on the surface. If Warren volunteered the phone information immediately, that's a friend being transparent in a crisis. If the information only surfaced after Christine caught the phone's real location on Life 360, that's not transparency. That's a story that only gets more honest once it's cornered. Those are two fundamentally different accounts of the same moment, and they can't both be true. And notice something else. In both tellings, Christine's and Warren's, the actual sequence lines up the same way. Christine raises the Life 360 data, and only after that does Warren clarify that they have the phone. Warren's version claims he said it first, but by his own account, and hers, the confirmation still traces back to the same trigger, Christine's own data. That's contradiction number 1. And it's the one that unlocks everything after it, because it raises a question nobody has answered yet. If Nolan really chose to stay behind, why did his phone leave the island without him? Here's where the story gets more complicated, and where a second contradiction starts to take shape. According to Christine, Warren told her he knew people at the Coast Guard and that he was going to call them. Read that carefully. Not, I'm calling the Coast Guard. Not, I'm reporting this through the emergency line. He knew people. He would call them. That distinction is not a technicality. It's the difference between an official distress notification, the kind that creates a paper trail, triggers a response protocol, and gets logged, and a personal phone call to someone you happen to know who works there. And that distinction may explain something that otherwise doesn't add up. The Coast Guard's own initial public statement said they had not been contacted by the group of friends until 12:30 a.m. Later, that statement changed. The Coast Guard said they had, in fact, been in contact earlier than that. Why would an official agency's story shift on something as basic as when they were first contacted? One explanation, and it's the one raised by both independent investigators reviewing this case, is that the very first contact wasn't an official emergency call at all. It was informal, a call to a personal connection, off the books in the sense that it didn't generate the same kind of institutional record a 911-style distress call would. If that's true, it means that during the most urgent early hours of this case, the hours when a fast, formal, coordinated search actually matters, the group's outreach to the one agency built for exactly this kind of emergency may not have functioned as an emergency call at all. Meanwhile, Christine was doing something entirely separate. She called the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. They told her they weren't sure the case fell in their jurisdiction, said they'd spoken with the Coast Guard, and told her to call the Ocean Springs Police Department instead. She called OSPD. They told her to come in person. She stopped at a hospital on the way to check if Nolan had been brought in. When she arrived at the police department, she was told, again, that this wasn't their jurisdiction either. She was sent back to MDMA. In her own words, "At that point, I'm like, who am I supposed to talk to? Who is supposed to help me with this?" This is a mother, on the single most terrifying night of her life, being bounced between 3 separate agencies because nobody could agree on who was responsible for a barrier island sitting out in open water. Wansley, the family's contact describing this to investigators, called it exactly what it sounds like: back and forth jurisdiction confusion, born out of the fact that Horn Island sits in the Mississippi Sound, a gap between agencies that nobody had cleanly resolved before this night became the night it mattered most. That's contradiction number 2, and it isn't really about blame yet. It's about infrastructure. If the first call to the Coast Guard was personal rather than official, it explains a documented public discrepancy in the Coast Guard's own timeline. And it means that while Christine was frantically trying to get any agency to take ownership of her son's disappearance, the one call that might have triggered immediate coordinated protocol may have gone out through a back channel instead. We'll come back to why that gap in the system matters even more later, because it's about to connect to something much bigger, hours of the night that, according to what these investigators found, do not appear to exist in any official document at all. The third contradiction is quieter than the first 2. But quiet doesn't mean small. In the same recorded interview, Morgan, one of the friends who was with the group that night, referenced a Snapchat photo that had been circulating in connection with the case. The problem, according to the investigators' analysis, is timing. That photo, by their account, was not posted until July 5th. Morgan referenced it as something already circulating on the night of July 4th, the same night Nolan went missing. 2 questions branch off from that immediately. First, How does someone reference something as already circulating before it existed? Second, and more important for anyone building an official timeline, was this simply a mix-up, a different photo, a misremembered date, or does it reveal something about what the friend group actually knew and when they knew it? Neither the friend's attorney nor any official statement has addressed this specific discrepancy publicly. That silence doesn't prove anything on its own, but it's a specific, checkable claim about a specific piece of media sitting unresolved in the public record. And unresolved is not the same as untrue, and it's not the same as false. It's simply a question that hasn't been answered yet, in a case that is about to be presented to a grand jury where every unanswered question gets asked again, under oath. Now to the fourth contradiction, the one that, once you see it, is genuinely difficult to unsee. While Nolan was still missing, Christine sent a friend to retrieve Nolan's phone near the Life 360 location. Her husband, Elmore, separately went to the house where Nolan had slept the previous night, trying to recover his keys. When Elmore arrived, he was initially told the keys weren't there. They were eventually found, on top of an Xbox. The phone, meanwhile, had already made its way back to the mainland with Nolan's friends. This produced a confrontation. Christine's family, in the middle of the night, moving from house to house, trying to physically locate their missing son's belongings, while the actual search for their son sat in limbo between agencies that couldn't agree on jurisdiction. Here's where it gets specific. In the recorded interview, Warren says plainly that he was not at the house when the family arrived to confront the group about the phone, that he wasn't physically present for that exchange. But in the very same interview, Warren goes on to describe a phone call that happened during that confrontation, describing it with real-time, in-the-moment detail, not something he heard about second-hand, afterward, from someone else's retelling. Detail that suggests he was close enough, at the time, to hear it as it happened. Those two things cannot both be true. You cannot be absent from a location and simultaneously possess live, detailed knowledge of a conversation that occurred inside it. Either Warren was there and heard it directly, or he wasn't there and is describing something he couldn't have actually witnessed in real time. One of those has to be wrong. To be clear about what this is and isn't, this isn't proof of a cover-up. People misspeak, especially describing a chaotic night weeks or months later. But it's a specific, structural contradiction inside a recorded, voluntary interview, not a sworn deposition, not testimony under oath, but a chosen public account. And in a case heading toward a grand jury, every voluntary public statement becomes a document that gets compared, line by line, against everything else in the file. If Contradiction 4 is about what someone said, Contradiction 5 is about what someone did, and it might be the hardest one to explain away. As the events of that night unfolded, Wyatt gave up his address so the group looking for Nolan could go check his boat. Wyatt and Morgan left Jax's house and headed there, and at some point, as Christine's family was making their way toward Wyatt's house to ask about the boat, Wyatt didn't call his parents to warn them. He didn't call Warren. He called 911 on Nolan's family. Sit with the mechanics of that for a moment. Your friend is missing. His parents are driving toward your house, terrified, looking for any information about their son. And your decision, before they've even arrived, before a single word has been exchanged, is to pick up the phone and report them to law enforcement. That is not what panic typically looks like. Panic looks like calling your own mother. Panic looks like a group chat exploding with all caps. Panic looks like freezing. What Wyatt did required something closer to the opposite of panic: anticipation. He had to know they were coming. He had to decide, in advance, that he wanted police there before they arrived, and he had to frame a grieving family in that 911 call as a threat. The full contents of that 911 call, what exactly was said, how the family was described, what specifically it triggered, have not been publicly released in full. The Friends' defense has broadly stated that their clients cooperated with investigators and maintained their innocence. That's a fair, standard legal position. But it does not address this specific moment, and this specific moment is not a small one. It's a documented, factual event, a 911 call made against the family of a missing teenager by one of the last people known to have been with him. Now here's where all 5 of those threads converge into something bigger than any one of them, the 6th contradiction, and arguably the most consequential. Remember the jurisdictional chaos from Chapter 3, MDMR sending Christine to OSPD, OSPD sending her back to MDMR, nobody willing to own the case because Horn Island sits out in the Mississippi Sound. That confusion wasn't just an inconvenience. It was the exact condition under which every confrontation described in this documentary took place. The house-to-house search for the phone and keys, the 10 to 15 people confronting Wyatt and demanding his address, the drive to check the boat, the 911 call against the family. According to the investigators who reviewed the available records, none of those confrontations appear in the official police reports from that night. Not the scene at Jax's house, not the demand for Wyatt's address, not the search of the boat, not the fact that, by the family's own account, they were effectively confronted at 2 separate properties in the middle of the night while looking for their missing son. What the official record does show is that throughout July 5th, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and MDMR were interviewing people who had been on Horn Island with Wells. That part is documented, but the hours before that, the hours between Warren's first call to Christine and the moment a deputy finally took a formal missing persons report, those hours, according to this analysis, exist almost nowhere on paper. Here's why that's not just a technicality. It's an evidentiary problem with long-term consequences. If there are inconsistencies between what the friends told Christine that night and what they later told investigators, there is no official, contemporaneous, third-party record to check either version against. There's Christine's account, there's the friend's account, and there's nothing sitting independently between them. That's not just a problem for a grieving family trying to understand what happened to their son. That's a problem for a future prosecution, a future grand jury proceeding, any future courtroom where the exact sequence of July 4th into July 5th needs to be reconstructed with precision. The gap isn't only emotional. It's structural. It's the kind of gap that, once you notice it, makes you wonder how thoroughly anyone was actually documenting this case in its most critical early hours. Let's pause and put all 6 side by side, because looking at them individually is different from looking at them together. 1. A phone story that shifted only after being confronted with hard location data. 2. A Coast Guard call that may have gone through a personal connection instead of an official emergency channel, matching a real, documented inconsistency in the Coast Guard's own public timeline. 3. A Snapchat photo referenced as circulating before it was reportedly posted. 4. A claim of absence from a location paired with real-time knowledge of what happened inside it. 5. A 911 call made against a missing teenager's own family. 6. Hours of documented confrontations that do not appear to exist in any official police report. None of these, on their own, proves wrongdoing. No charges have been filed. No arrest has been made. The investigation remains officially open, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Department has previously stated that investigators have found no evidence indicating foul play. But there's a question a former prosecutor would ask before any question about guilt. When you lay inconsistencies like this, side by side, do they look like the ordinary fuzziness of human memory, or do they follow a pattern? Genuine memory errors tend to be random. They don't consistently break in the same direction. A person misremembering where the keys were is just as likely to get it wrong in a way that hurts them as in a way that helps them. What the investigators are pointing to is that these 6 discrepancies don't look random. They resolve, again and again, in a direction that adds distance and reduces accountability. That doesn't mean it's deliberate. It doesn't mean it's evidence of a crime. But it is the kind of pattern that gets noticed in a grand jury room, because a grand jury's job is precisely to ask whether the available evidence is enough to move forward, not to determine guilt, but to determine whether the questions deserve a formal answer. Now for the piece of physical evidence sitting underneath every one of those 6 contradictions. Nolan's body was found at the northwestern tip of Horn Island, the same location where he was last seen. Family attorney Ben Crump has said publicly that his team is now working with oceanic engineering experts specifically on this question. How is that possible, given the tides? 2 days passed between when Nolan was last seen and when his body was recovered. Ocean currents move things, tides move things, and yet, according to Crump's team, the body was found essentially where he was last known to be, not carried, not displaced, sitting there. Forensic audio specialists are reviewing the full emergency radio call from July 4th. Separately, ocean engineering experts are examining exactly how the recovery location lines up with tidal patterns over that 48-hour window. 2 different expert teams, 2 different questions, and both of them converging on the same physical location. This doesn't answer what happened on July 4th. Nobody involved is claiming that it does, but it's the family's own legal team stating, on the record, that there's a physical gap here that ordinary tidal movement alone may not explain. And that gap sits directly beside the 6 contradictions from the interview, in the same investigation, heading toward the same grand jury. Here's something that happened quietly, without the same attention as the autopsy findings, but that belongs in this story. Christine Wansley became the subject of an anonymous complaint filed with the Mississippi Board of Nursing. A professional misconduct investigation opened against her while she was publicly asking questions about her son's death. Ben Crump called it a warning shot, an act of intimidation directed at a grieving mother. The board's investigation was later closed. Christine posted about the closure on Facebook herself. Crump has said it should never have been filed in the first place. We are not saying that complaint is connected to anything else in this case. That would be speculation, and we don't traffic in that here. What we can say, factually, is this. A family seeking answers about their son's death had a 911 call made against them by one of the last people known to be with him. And weeks later, the mother asking the hardest public questions had a professional misconduct complaint filed against her anonymously. Both things happened. Both are part of the public record now. And both had the same practical effect, pressure on the people asking the questions. If there's one thread that could resolve several of these contradictions at once, it's this one. The family's legal team has announced they are ready to immediately turn over Nolan's phone for a joint forensic examination, with their own experts on standby to begin the inspection at any time. They've formally notified the district attorney's office. Talks are ongoing about a joint inspection of the phones connected to this case, and attorney Eric Herds has said he believes the FBI would also be present. That's not the posture of a family with something to hide. That's a family saying, look at everything. And here's why it matters specifically to the contradictions we've already covered. If Warren's account of the phone's whereabouts shifted depending on what Christine already knew, from "in my truck" to "he left it behind," only after she produced her own Life 360 data, then a forensic device examination could settle, with actual data, which version holds up. Phones carry information their owners can't always fully erase: timestamps, location pings, message histories, deleted content that wasn't deleted as cleanly as intended. As Herds put it publicly, that kind of examination is going to show a lot of stuff we have not seen. Whether it happens at all, and whether the FBI actually participates, still depends on negotiations that are ongoing. But the family's phone is already on the table. The question that remains is who else's phone will be. An independent autopsy, commissioned by the family's legal team, listed Nolan's cause and manner of death as undetermined, pending further investigation. According to Ben Crump, the doctor who conducted it said he could not rule out foul play. That phrase, "cannot rule out," carries real weight in forensic pathology. It doesn't mean foul play occurred. It also doesn't mean it didn't. It means the physical evidence, as examined, is not inconsistent with that possibility. The body did not settle the question. It left it open. The independent report also noted red discoloration on the back of Nolan's head, a finding that has not been publicly attributed to anything, not explained as a natural post-mortem change, not explained as trauma. Simply present and simply unaddressed in any public statement from authorities. The independent examiner was also unable to determine whether water was present in Nolan's lungs, a finding that could help establish whether he drowned. And even a drowning determination, Crump has pointed out, wouldn't answer the deeper question, what was Nolan's condition when he entered the water? Conscious, unconscious, forced in. 3 entirely different scenarios, and as it stands, the physical evidence cannot separate them. The state's own autopsy, conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office, has been completed, but the results remain sealed, expected to stay that way until they're formally presented to a grand jury. That grand jury will be the body that determines whether what happened to Nolan Wells constitutes a crime. The Jackson County District Attorney's Office has said, accurately, that convening a grand jury doesn't imply criminality. It's standard procedure for unnatural or suspicious deaths in the county. That's true, and it's worth saying plainly, so nobody mistakes procedure for accusation. But standard procedure still requires presenting the full evidence, and presenting the full evidence means a room of ordinary citizens will eventually hear the autopsy findings, the account of the phone's movements, the Coast Guard timeline, and whatever documentation, or lack of it, exists for the confrontations that happened that night. A newly completed independent analytical review, examining photographs, videos, GPS coordinates, and witness accounts, concluded that there remains a material gap in the timeline between the last independently corroborated sighting of Nolan and the reported departure of the boat. The report is explicit that it reaches no conclusion about criminal or civil responsibility. It simply identifies evidence that investigators may still need in order to close that gap. That's a professional, formal finding, not a social media theory. A material gap, officially identified, sitting at the center of the timeline, and into that exact gap fall the 6 contradictions from the recorded interview, the phone, the Coast Guard call, the Snapchat timing, the location claim, the 911 call, and the missing documentation of that night's confrontations. None of it, individually, proves what happened to Nolan Wells. Together, it's the reason this case isn't closed. It's worth being precise about what Christine and Elmore Wansley have said they want, because it isn't a predetermined outcome, and it isn't revenge. In a Facebook post, Christine wrote, "If advocating for our deceased child to have a fair, honest, and transparent investigation while asking local authorities to treat his case as if it were their own makes you feel some type of way, please." She continued, in words that needed no attorney to write them for her. "We are not asking for special treatment. We just want the truth. His father and I will not stop searching for the truth." That's the entire ask. A fair, honest, transparent process. Treat Nolan's case the way you'd treat your own child's. Ben Crump has urged anyone with photographs, videos, or information from that day on Horn Island to come forward, and a $125,000 reward remains active for information that advances the investigation. That reward being active, weeks later, tells you something on its own. There is still information out there that hasn't surfaced. Somebody may still be holding it. Hundreds of miles away in New Orleans, community members gathered for a second-line procession in Nolan's honor, organized, in part, to remind his family that they weren't carrying this alone. Ocean Springs, Chicago, New York, New Orleans. People showing up, wearing blue, holding his name. That's not internet noise. That's a community deciding this case deserved more than a quiet, preliminary ruling. Here is exactly where things stand right now, stated plainly, without embellishment. No charges have been filed, no arrest has been made. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department has said investigators have found no evidence indicating foul play, and the investigation remains active while officials await the final report from the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. The state autopsy is complete but sealed, expected to be presented to a grand jury that will determine whether a crime occurred. The family's legal team continues to negotiate a joint forensic phone examination with the FBI possibly present. A doctor involved in the independent autopsy is still trying to obtain tissue that was missing at the time of the second examination. What we do know, on the record, 6 specific, documented inconsistencies inside one recorded interview. A body found in a location that oceanic tides may not fully explain. A jurisdictional gap so wide that hours of confrontation involving Nolan's own family may not exist in any official report. And a mother who, in the middle of a nursing board investigation, a sealed autopsy, and months of unanswered calls, still posted this to her son. "Your father and I will always fight for you. Your life matters to us. There's not a moment that goes by that we aren't thinking of you. We are truly blessed to have you as a son." Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He should have turned 19 in August. He was going back to school. He made people feel welcomed just by being in the room with them. Whatever the grand jury eventually decides, whatever the sealed autopsy ultimately reveals, whatever those phones show once they're finally examined, none of it changes who he was. It only determines whether the people responsible for finding out what happened to him did their job with the seriousness his life deserved. We will keep following every court filing, every grand jury update, every forensic result as they come. If this case matters to you, stay with us, because his family isn't stopping, and neither should the search for what actually happened to their son.